Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 2 of the MOOC. I'm very happy to have Carl-Gustav Lindén with us today. Carl-Gustav is a media journalism researcher at the University of Helsinki and also a lecturer at Södertörn University in Stockholm. At the University of Helsinki, he led a project called Immersive Automation, which was all about using automated production of news content. Carl-Gustav, hello. It's great to have you with us via Skype today. Thanks so much for sharing your time and knowledge with the MOOC. So first off, I wanted to kind of ask if you could fill us in a little bit more on this immersive automation project on news automation that you've been working on. What is that all about, and what did you sort of accomplish in that project?
Yeah, great. Yes, it's my favorite topic. I started researching news automation. Some call it robot journalism. In a while, I will tell you why I don't like the word or metaphor robot journalism. But we starting to work on news automation a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and then realizing that this is something really exciting and together a group of media companies, tech companies, and researchers from the University of Helsinki to create a project named Immersive Automation. I got funded for that. So we worked for 17 months, which in research terms is a quite speedy sort of time schedule, but we actually got a lot done in a very few months. What we did, we started with creating a prototype, writing news from the local elections in Finland in 2017, election bot, and that was really excellent. In 3 languages. One of the aims of the project was to create multi-language applications. So we had this in Finnish, Swedish, and English. And Finnish is in no way related to either Swedish or Finnish. So that's was sort of the big issue, how to sort of develop a really system for a language which is really little used and has no sort of support in computer science. So we did that, and the bot worked very well. We did some updates, and we also tested the sort of the text written by the bot on real audiences, and had them read text by journalists and text written by the bot to see sort of the differences. And then we actually got funded again for a new project. So this is now continuing as a EU project called Embedia. Last week we had a kickoff meeting in Ljubljana in Slovenia, 50 people in the room, so that's a much bigger project. So yes, and during the project I have sort of traveled the world to meet everybody who's sort of in the business of news automation, meaning service providers, journalists who work with news automation, researchers, and so forth. So I think we have a pretty good picture of what's being done. And I think the virtue of this immersive automation on our bot is the sort of the modularity. I mean, we have sort of put together, when you usually have these templates for texts are written by journalists, very nicely written templates, a long text, and you just fill in the numbers. Our system puts together sentences and is quite autonomously deciding what text should be like. We have some basic rules, but otherwise, I mean, it's really a system which is more free to sort of decide by itself. And I think this is something which is more, because everything I see about news automation is template-based, text-based. I was very happy last year when I heard that a German company had produced 8,000 templates, and I thought, wow, now it's happening finally. So I called them, and no, they have written every one of these 8,000 templates by hand. With a huge job.
Wow.
So we're far away from real automation. This is sort of very much handicraft. I mean, this is done by journalists. There's very little intelligence involved in this system.
So you mentioned that you did some evaluation in the context of your project. I mean, what were you testing, and what did you find in those evaluations?
Well, one sort of key issue was if there's a text written about something happening close to you, your party, your candidate, then people are much more accepting the sort of that the text might not be as good as the text written by a journalist, and the difference is quite much smaller than what you would think, and the sort of the people trust text written by these systems almost as much as by journalists. So this is not the problem either. Uh, but the one thing with the credibility of automated texts is that it's culturally contexted. I mean, it's if you do this in, say, in Korea, you get totally different results than, for instance, in Germany or in France or in UK. So you have something called the Hollywood robot syndrome, which means that how do you feel about robots, or is it a picture you get about robots from, say, Hollywood films, quite much decide what you will think about something like this. So this is things you need to think about.
Yeah, so given your experience kind of working on and building and studying these systems, what do you sort of see as the main benefits of using automated content in newsrooms?
Of course, I mean, these texts has been done by journalists. These are sort of routine news text, small pieces of news, which takes an incredible lot of time to write, and has a very little sort of influence on the audience. I think today's journalism needs more elaborate journalism, more qualitative, more investigative journalism. This is what people are prepared to pay for. I don't think people are prepared to pay for these pieces of sort of, who won the game last night type of stuff. And so I think journalists needs to move up the scale, up the sort of ladder of the quality scale anyway. And this is just one way of sort of making sure that there's still all these small pieces of news which are important in themselves for somebody, but which takes a lot of time to do, that somewhere they are produced still. And I think that's sort of the freeing up the sort of the time and energy for journalists to do things that really matter for them that's sort of, I think, the greatest benefit here.
And so on the flip side, I mean, what are maybe some of the drawbacks to using this type of content for newsrooms?
Of course, publishers are always looking for ways to save money, and certainly you can save money by doing this. But I don't think it's a really good business model. I think that, as I said, people are prepared to pay for quality news, for unique news that are relevant to them, and not sort of a billion stories about something not that meaningful. So I think you can save money, of course. You can produce more stuff and still having a few journalists. And it might be a trade-off here as well. I mean, at least have some journalists staying if there's problems with the business model of media, news media. This might be a way of sort of dealing with that. But of course, I mean, as I said, publishers, they want to save money because it's paying journalists is very expensive.
Right. So to pick up on that a little bit more, I mean, do you see automated content impacting jobs in some kind of substantive way? Have you seen automated content already putting journalists out of work?
We have had automation in newsrooms for decades. I mean, you have Photoshop, you have word spelling check programs, you have all this kind of sort of software which used to be called artificial intelligence until you had them in your hands actually working with it. So of course, I mean, darkroom assistants have disappeared from newsrooms. I don't think journalists think this is such a big deal. Journalists are doing more and more stuff themselves with these new tools. So in a way, I mean, everybody else sort of disappeared from the newsroom, but journalists are still there working. So they should be. I think they should be happy about that. I don't see any impact from automation on news work per se. But then again, of course, the positive sort of spin is, of course, around the efficiency of journalism, having more tools, smart tools, telling you what's happening there, what is relevant for your audience. I mean, metrics in any way. And I think those sort of tools are making the jobs of journalists more efficient. And it might be that, if you're not able to sort of work in that environment, you might get laid off. I don't know. This might be an actual problem for some.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the U.S., I've seen, in fact, a few new jobs created in order to kind of manage automation or oversee it or develop it. I mean, are you seeing any of that going on in the automation projects that you've studied? Are people actually hiring in order to maintain or supervise the automation?
I think you lost your voice. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so in the U.S. context, I've actually seen a few companies are hiring people, so automation editors, supervisors, people to maintain, people to create data and so on for these systems. Are you seeing any of that in your studies of the systems that you've come across?
Yes, of course, there's new sort of categories in the newsroom, but these people are very few. I mean, we don't see a massive employment of let's say, computational journalists. These are special skills needed for a few, but I don't think this will affect the sort of the skills of the newsroom in a bigger picture. What I was referring to was maybe more sort of skills to use new tools, but maybe not to develop new tools. And I think journalists, journalists are big users of new technology, and they need sort of the fast adaptation sort of processes for journalists to be able to sort of gain from the development in the software business.
That's interesting because one of the things that we're talking about this week in the MOOC is how to use a tool called Aria Studio, which is very much, a template writing program, as you know. So hopefully that's a chance for some of the students taking the course to start to get some of those skills using these tools. So I wanted to you kind of alluded to something earlier, and I wanted to kind of come back to that. So, going back several years now, automated content production was originally kind of framed or popularized under the term of robot journalism. And I know you've written some things and you've been sort of critical of that framing. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more? What's your view on this whole robot journalism idea?
Yeah, as a former journalist and nowadays an academic, I really want people to use the right wordings for what they're talking about. We have a lot of problems with misunderstanding each other, depending on the metaphors we use, the stories we rely on. I mean, it's so much, especially in innovation, is such a, what I say, PR or hype, prone to hype. And I think it makes our lives much easier if we use the proper words, we define what we're talking about. And with robot journalism, the problem is that we have no mechanical parts. I mean, these are software systems. There are no robots coming to take the jobs, but still the illustrators of these pieces of news or these analysis and these articles always have a robot there with the keyboard, which just doesn't make sense. And there's several problems. One is, as I said, the Hollywood robot syndrome. Journalists tend to be afraid of these sort of robot journalism thing. They think that these are going to take the jobs, and if you look at the illustrations, that actually seems to be the way, even though these are non-intrusive systems. And of course, I mean, with regard to robots overall, I mean, you have some problems with that. I tried to sort of, very little success I have so far, I must say, to introduce the washing machine, where I see what journalists are doing. They are sort of sorting the laundry, they are sorting the data, cleaning the data according to sort of color, fabric, and what temperature you should have in the washing machine, and then use the right program and push the button, you start button. And that's sort of, I think, in a way captures all the work that journalists did before, and now can just have the machine to do. But as I said, I've discussed this on many conferences, people laugh. I think this is funny, but I see the robot journalists coming back everywhere, unfortunately.
So we should be talking about washing machine journalists. Is that the better metaphor, I guess?
In your class, you could have a sort of a topic of trying to find a better metaphor. I don't think the washing machine is that good either. I would prefer something neutral like news automation, but let's see. Please let your students think about this.
So, what do you think is the role of things like drones? And will we ever see sort of true robots coming into journalism, like real physical robots, or is that 50 or 100 years away?
Yeah, I think it's probably 1920s something. I wouldn't see why would we have robots in journalism. I mean, we have sort of software devices, probably all kinds of, bots that do interviews for us, collect information, drones taking pictures, following something. Is a drone a robot? Not quite sure. What I believe, and actually now having worked with sort of news automation for years, I'm a computer scientist, I'm really, really interested in what makes journalists human. So my new research project is actually about passion in journalism. What is passion, and how is that sort of, and passion as part of the sort of, everybody's talking about engagement, and the engagement in the business models for media, which is important because you need to get the right sort of connection to your audience and have them pay for what you produce, and not having Facebook or Google in between taking the money. And I think true authentic passion is one important part of the business model, but it's never been discussed in journalism studies. It's just recently come up as something, while we all know who have been working as journalists that newsrooms are really passionate. I mean, people are screaming, almost crying every day, but this is not covered in research. So I think this I think would be a interesting way of path towards new research insights.
So that's a really interesting sort of area for future research. I mean, in terms of the automated production of content, I mean, what are you excited about there in terms of future research? Are there interesting directions that you're thinking about? I mean, where is this all going?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting with 5G technology, mobile phone technology, and sensors everywhere producing information, and sort of how do we get this information? What is relevant for us? There's a really interesting research project in Germany called Ambient News, in Hamburg around there, where they sort of get on your smart mirrors in your bathroom, for instance, get news or some social signals, and so you're always updated with what you need to know about what's happening right now, weather or traffic or whatever it is. I think those types of it's not really news, but it's part of the news sort of repertoire, I think. And these kinds of things I think will be really important with alerts, alarms, updates from these sensors, from maybe in a moderated by a human or something.
Interesting. And so, I mean, what do you think news organizations should be investing in then? I mean, where should they be? Yeah. So where do you think news organizations should be investing? I mean, where should they be putting their innovation funds and their sort of innovation data science teams and computer scientists? What should they be building next?
It's a really good question. Fortunately, very few media companies have these resources to build new stuff from scratch, which is maybe needed. So for providers and service providers for this. And it's really hard to say what the focus will be, but I would say that focus on actually real journalists. I think that's really an area which we tend to forget when you talk about metrics and analytics and data, whatever. We need real journalists who do real journalism. That's really important. That's sort of the basis for the business model. And as we add these new software services and algorithms and automation to the sort of the editorial systems, we need to make journalists even more human. And this is something I think that the CEO of Apple has said, Tim Cook, that he's not concerned about machines becoming humans. He's concerned about humans becoming machines, and I think we should think about that much more. So
yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It's come up in a variety of contexts I'm studying, as well as sort of how do we push back against people becoming too mechanical in sort of their role in these systems. Well, so stepping back, is there any kind of, I guess, final parting advice you would offer the students of the MOOC as far as, as they start to learn more about these tools and technologies and even try some of them on in terms of like writing in ARIA Studio? Yeah, any final advice for them?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about these systems as interesting, exciting, but you might not need to have the ambition to become an expert on sort of developing this stuff. But you need to be an expert on understanding what they do, what they're for, what's the logic behind, how they decide, and to be able to discuss these, because as you're an expert on algorithmic decision systems overall, and I think that's sort of also something we need to teach journalism students to understand how these systems work, not just in journalism, but everywhere in society. And I think that's sort of a broadening the view from not just journalism and news media.
It sounds like definitely the stuff that we're trying to cover in the MOOC. So that's great. Well, this has really been fascinating, Carl-Gustav. Thanks again for spending some time with us and for sharing your knowledge with the students in the MOOC. It was great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It was nice. Thank you.